This is a replay of the Germantown scenario with pub battles by Command Post Games. We begin with the night turn. The colonial forces under Washington are approaching. Here we have a detachment in Cliveden, often called Chew House. It was a stone building, very hard to attack, unusual in colonial America. It has a detachment in it. Of Washington's 5 commands, 2 of them will get lost in the dark night. The first 3 chits I draw will be the 3 of 5 commands that make it. The first is Smallwood. Smallwood's command comes within 1/3 of Chew House. They're in column. They will have to come out of column before they can approach it. Excuse me, that was Sullivan's command. Now Smallwood comes on, and he's there. Armstrong's command comes on. Armstrong's militia came down Chestnut Hill Road, turned off just before they got to Wissahickon Creek, and began following the creek down, deploying into line. Washington and Greene's command were delayed and did not make it down in the night. Turn 1. Smallwood's militia attack Chew House. Greene makes his appearance coming down Shoemaker's Mill Road. Next, the British forces react to the oncoming colonials. Now we're playing the campaign game that started out in Brandywine, and in Brandywine the British were forced to retreat, which puts them sort of off-footed for the Battle of Germantown. The Grenadiers have been pulled off on river crossing duty, river defense duty, and Matthew's Guard will not be arriving until turn 4. Therefore, the British are at a serious disadvantage, and they're going to maintain a defensive stance, except Howe is again going to try to outflank Washington, and he's bringing up his best troops that are with him right now, Abercrombie's Light, and they're going to attempt to come around behind Washington. We'll see how that works. It's a very foggy morning. The cavalry are riding across. Armstrong's troops, following down along the Wissahickon Creek, detect the British coming up on the west side of the creek. They send word to Washington. Sullivan's troops surround Chew House, and the remainder begin moving down the Germantown Pike. Smallwood's messengers alert Washington as he comes down the Germantown Pike, and he sends off a detachment to investigate at Wissahickon Creek. Now, there's just a detachment in Chew House, but Chew House, because it's a stone building, counts as a fortification, which means they never consider themselves surrounded, and then they can ignore retreat results. Ordinarily, 1 hit will eliminate a detachment, but in this case, it will take 2 hits. They hold. That's the end of turn 1. Turn 2. Turn 2 begins with Greene deploying. Washington intends to secure the Cliveden house before moving on. Sullivan deploys his line and continues pressure on Cliveden. Armstrong's militia cover the crossing on the Wissahickon. Elements of Abercrombie's Light encounter the militia and hide just far enough in the fog, firing to keep them engaged, while Abercrombie moves up to the next crossing. Smallwood's militia keeps under pressure at Chew House. Washington peels off a detachment from Sterling's division and sends it over to stiffen up Armstrong's militia. He keeps Sterling back with Knox's artillery. The fog is clinging stubbornly. Again, trying to reduce Chew House. And they do. That's the end of turn 2. It's now moving towards late morning. And still, Washington hasn't got his attack going. They've finally reduced Chew House. Ultimately, the dense fog will last all day. Sullivan's forces begin moving forward. Green's men begin moving forward. Armstrong guesses it's only a small British force, and together with the regulars, they attack. Washington brings his men forward. British detachments fade back out of sight in the fog. Knyphausen comes up the road, takes control of his forces. These 3 blocks belong to Knyphausen. Smallwood's militia ordered to cover the rear. They follow Germantown Pike up to Mount Airy. That ends turn 3. Sullivan opening up the assault. They hit the British left. Armstrong's militia continue to chase the British. Green hits Knyphausen's forward elements. Abercrombie's Light occupy Reading Road, cutting off one of the Colonials' line of communications. Knyphausen sends his Hessians forward. Suddenly Washington is feeling surrounded. And good news for Washington, Abercrombie's detachment melts in combat. On the British left, Sullivan's assault opens up. His men are thrown back. In the center, they run into the British artillery. The artillery fires first. The Virginians are thrown back. Sullivan's remaining division facing the Hessians. The Colonials are eliminated. The Hessians are in bad shape. They fall back. In the last combat, the British right, Green's men, also thrown back. Howe's men hold. The SC into turn 4. Turn 5. The initial assault by the colonial forces in midday has been repulsed with heavy losses. Washington must decide if he's going to attempt to recover and press on, or cut his losses and fall back. He's not ready to give up yet. Lord Stirling presses the artillery forward to the top of the hill. They're at least going to try and hold there. Sullivan deploys his bags. Brings his units back up to strength. Green deploys his bags also. And his men recover. Armstrong continues advancing up towards the crossing by the Schuylkill River. Now Abercrombie's light troops are not in combat command. Cornwallis comes on this turn, mid-afternoon. It would be great if the British could get a commander up here, but there is no reasonable path that a British general could imagine through the fog and colonial troops that they wouldn't begin to know what to do. Howe's feeling pretty confident, having thrown the Americans back. Maybe they're just going to pull back. Turn 5 is over. Turn 6. Rested and revitalized, Green attacks. He has a detachment occupy the woods north of Frankfort Creek. Knyphausen's men fall back. Sullivan renews the attack on the British left, leaves some men between his and Washington's forces, and holds. He doesn't want to try attacking those artillery again. Cornwallis sends the dragoons forward to break up the colonial attack, moves his bags back behind Matthew. Armstrong's militia reaches the crossing by Vandering's Mill. Sullivan's attack on the British left appears to be foiled as he's outflanked by the dragoons. The colonials fall back in disarray. Turn 7. On the British left, Cornwallis moves forward. Let us see if we can keep the colonials running along. Pressing through the gap in the colonial lines, they contact the bags. Armstrong's militia, with a detachment of Washington's lifeguards, presses into the British rear. At this point, Washington realizes there's nothing he can do to save his line. He sounds the retreat. Armstrong's militia felt they were so close, but it's all been called off. All been for naught. In game terms, The British have contacted the colonial bags. There's nothing they can do to change that. The bags haven't activated yet. When they activate, they'll unpack, move off, and that means the Americans have run away. A stunning British victory on turn 7. Good game.